The year is 1364. The 100 Years' War between England and France has been going for almost 30 years, and things are not going well for the French. Their Valois king, Jean II, is dead from sickness after 8 years in English captivity. In the power vacuum during Jean's imprisonment, France has suffered encroachments from both internal and external enemies. Maybe the most dangerous of these enemies is Charles II of Navarre, known to history as Charles the Bad. Although he is King of Navarre, he also owns titles in Normandy that are technically under the French crown, making him a vassal of the French. But the times being what they are, fealty to the Valois means little, especially to an ambitious man like Charles the Bad, who has spent the last decade backstabbing both France and England a dozen times, switching sides at the first advantage. Through all of this, he has gradually added to his French possessions and has established himself as a power within the kingdom's borders. This time his sights are set on Burgundy, where he actually has a pretty strong blood claim. Possession of Burgundy will give Charles a dominant power base in France, and he will have the sort of influence over domestic affairs that the Valois princes enjoy. But the French royal family are not too keen on letting a snake in their home, and Burgundy predictably goes to King Jean and then is inherited by one of the princes. All the while, Charles the Bad's Norman possessions are being whittled away by French sieges. This is too much for the Navarrese king, and he musters his forces for all-out war. He will attack on two fronts. The main effort will be in Burgundy, where he sends his brother Louis with a fat purse to hire a Rothian mercenary army. To Normandy he sends the Capitale de Buc with a small army. The Capitale will reinforce the main Navarrese stronghold at Evreux and start the long grind to take back all the recently lost Norman possessions. Each army moves to the River Eure for a decisive encounter. It is the 15th of May. Both the French and Navarrese are resting inside of the river, and neither is aware of the other yet. The French did not pack for a long campaign, and they are already running out of food. For better or worse, they intend to fight within the next 24 hours. At around midnight, both armies break camp and set out into the darkness in full formation. The nighttime strategy has come to be standard in the highly experienced and professional forces of the 1360s. Their use of such advanced tactics makes them unrecognizable from the woefully organized royal hosts of the previous decades. At about 4 in the morning, the Navarrese come upon the hill from where they can look down on the plains of Cocherel before the River Eure. They can already see the silhouettes of the French drawing up into battle array in the first light of the dawn. The Capitale fixes his banner in a thorny bush on the mountain to be used as a rallying point if need should arise. With this banner at the center, the Navarrese form up into 3 battalions. The Navarrese agree to stay on the hill, not attacking under any circumstances. The Capitale knows the French want to fight, and is content to keep his terrain advantage and wait for them to come to him. The sun rises to reveal a picturesque meadow below them, covered in French banners. An impressive array of heraldry is on display on this remote Norman field, the big emblems of famous lords and nobles, as well as the small ones of rising knights and men-at-arms. The Navarrese are unaware that the experienced French commanders have ordered their men to plant additional banners to create the illusion of a larger force. Even today we don't know how many men each army fielded, but there were a couple of thousand on each side. The French are drawn up into 3 regiments, same as the Navarrese. They have left most of their baggage train on the other side of the river, displaying their intent to fight. The high-ranking men of the French army meet to discuss the situation. They agree that capturing the enemy's rallying banner, prominent as it was, would be instrumental in breaking their morale. To achieve this, they organize a rearguard of 30 elite mounted knights to attack the Navarrese banner as well as the Capitale himself. Then the French discuss who should lead the force. There are some very high-ranking French noblemen in the army, but in the end they go with experience over rank, and unanimously elect Sir Bertrand de Guesclin to lead them. This is a big shift in priority from earlier French armies led by nepotism. All the while, the Navarrese sit in their dominant position, watching the movements of the French lines and waiting for them to make the first move. This is a problem for the French, as the Navarrese have the benefit of shade from the Bois de Laurent, as well as access to their baggage train. The more experienced of the French know the sapping effect which hunger and exhaustion can have on fighting men. They fear this more than the fight itself. Again, the French leaders gather to discuss their options. As so often happens at these councils, the younger men want to attack up the hill regardless of their disadvantage. Anything else, they claim, would bring shame upon them and was tantamount to defeat. But the more experienced French knights had seen the inglorious results of such suicidal charges at the battles of Crécy and Poitiers, and overrule this rash idea. These men, including de Guesclin, want a change in the strategic balance before they act. Meanwhile, the French receive new information from a strange source. Some prisoners of the Navarrese casually approach the French formation on horseback. Even though these men are technically captives, their high rank means that they are free to ride wherever they please, having given their word that they would not take up arms. These prisoners inform the French that the Navarrese enemy are expecting thousands of reinforcements to arrive tomorrow, including the Navarrese king's brother, Louis of Navarre. Now there is even more reason for the French to confront their enemy before the day is out. The Navarrese will only grow stronger, while they themselves have no prospect of reinforcements. As this unfortunate news spreads through the lines, the French make ready for attack, but nothing happens, and the men grow restless in their lines. It becomes apparent that no marching orders are forthcoming, and the initial rush of impending combat lapses into hunger and heat exhaustion for the French. It is now midday. The French commanders meet for the second time today, and this time under much greater pressure. Those who were cautious before and had urged inactivity now believe they should retreat across the bridge and form a plan for later. Neither idea has much to commend it. The heavily armoured men are faint from the heat, and another summer night in rough encampment will not help their exhaustion. Falling back, even for a day, sounds like defeat. De Guesclin decides on a compromise, to which all commanders assent. They return to their lines and tell their lieutenants the plan. Horns sound from the French lines, and the Navarrese watch as the French begin to fall back across the bridge. The servants and horse of the French cross first, while their main fighting body is sluggish and moving, presenting a tempting target for a charge. But the Navarrese do not move from the hill, and the Captal reinforces his order to hold position. He smells a ruse in the French movements, and he flatly refuses his men's exhortations to attack now while the French are vulnerable. He doesn't intend for their movements to dictate his own. Unbeknownst to the Captal, John Jewel and his eager Englishmen on the right wing have decided to take the initiative, disregarding their commander's order to stay on the hill. A battle cry of St. George coming from his right is the first that the Captal knows of the English attack. Before he can respond, Jewel is halfway down the hill, sword in hand, followed closely by the entire right wing of the Navarrese army. Some Navarrese mount their horses and follow, impatient to run down the French. At this point it's too late to recall Jewel. The Captal has two choices. He can abandon the English contingent to their fate and save the remaining two-thirds of his army, or he can sound the advance with the rest of his army and hope that the French are caught unprepared. He decides that he cannot afford to lose the English, who are some of the most experienced and valuable troops at his disposal. The Navarrese trumpets sound the advance, and the two remaining regiments move swiftly down the hill to support their English comrades. The Navarrese army is in full swing down the hill when the French horns sound again. Captal can only watch as the three French regiments expertly wheel back around to face the attack. The French are not just ready, they're visibly rejoicing at the enemy's approach. Their turn is so fluid that they will have time to dress and straighten their lines before Jewel and his English can reach them. To his credit, Jewel can see that he has misjudged the French readiness, and he is somehow able to stop the advancing tide and reform his lines. The overeager Navarrese who had mounted their horses dismount again and join their formations. Jewel has drifted left, and his formation now faces De Guesclin. While the remaining two Navarrese regiments catch up, the longbowmen in the English contingent come to the front. Soon, their 2.5-foot arrows are bursting through the packed mass of De Guesclin's Bretons at over 170 kilometers an hour. Despite the masterful skill of the 300 longbowmen, their arrows mostly shatter on the heavy frontal armor of the French, or else are absorbed by skillfully placed pavie shields. Besides some splinters and a few broken ribs, their arrows make no real effect on the French line, and the English longbowmen retire to the rear, having done all they can. It's left up to the men-at-arms with their butcher's tools. The respective battle cries erupt from both lines. Notre Dame competes with their opposites, St. George. The lines advance to meet each other, and the butcher's work begins in earnest. At first in isolated sections, then along the entire front, the two lines batter and slash each other with axe and blade. The lines quickly lose their shape entirely, devolving into disorganized melee. The battle is fought man to man, with any command structure having lost all power. Confusion reigns, as with all battles from this period. The only way to know what side a fighter is on is to identify his house by his coat of arms, or else to exchange battle cries over the din. The battle's result is now up to the individual skill and strength of each man-at-arms. Many knights recognize faces among their opponents. Many fighting each other are all comrades in arms. The melee is long and balanced. a man-to-man brawl without the usual inglorious distractions of bowmen and flanking maneuvers to cut short the marathon. The battle's character is more like a tournament melee than a late medieval battle, and will be remembered by participants and chroniclers for the brutal length. Those fighters who can extract prisoners from the killing ground have ample time to deposit their catches in friendly lines and return to the fight. It's all the more ferocious that both sides know their opponents have many skilled warriors among their number. There's little opportunity to rest between bouts, even for those fortunate enough to be away from their unrelenting center. Neither side lets up for a moment, trying to drive the other into exhaustion and submission. The French chronicler Jean Froissart wrote about how each fighter loyally agreed not only to defend himself and his post vigorously, but to take every advantage that should offer. If they did not do so, they would be defeated. Each army is like a brick wall with individuals who fall being crushed mercilessly, regardless of their rank or noble blood. Only the luckiest of the wounded and prisoners are dragged out of the melee. Many are slaughtered where they are found, or else left to suffer beneath the brutal violence. Many notable fighters on each side are captured, wounded and killed. The English commander Sir John Jules fights bravely at the front until he is mortally wounded by several sword slashes to the head and torso. It appears that the Navarrese momentum is building, with the French line being slowly pushed back in places. But Du Guesclin and his French still have their trump card, and they decide to play it now. The rear guard of 30 French knights wheels around the Navarrese flank in tight formation. From the miserable exhaustion of the melee, the troop of mounted Gascons in their fresh, shining armour make a powerful sight. The main weakness of cavalry is a longbow, but the English archers have long since exchanged their bows for daggers and joined the melee. The corps of 30 brook no distractions. They don't stop to take valuable prisoners nor to help their comrades. They know exactly what they're after. The Capitale de Buc, highly visible in his red armour, with yellow and black coat of arms, is engaged deep in the melee. The 30 French knights head straight for him. In just moments they reach him, and envelop the exhausted Capitale. He has no choice but to submit to their overwhelming strength. The rest of the exhausted Navarrese around the Capitale can only watch as the Gascon knights carry off their commander. Those who capture them immediately exit the field with their prisoner, and without waiting for the battle's result, take him to the castle at Vernon for safekeeping. As the disaster overtakes their commander at the centre, the Navarrese are winning almost everywhere else. But the French hit squad isn't done yet. Once the Capitale is secured, they immediately rush his standard in the thorny bush. The standard is defended by many skilled knights, and a handful of famous names on both sides meet their end in the shadow of the Capitale's banner. But the French assault squad is overwhelming, and the standard is soon being torn to pieces and dragged along the ground among the corpses of its defenders. News of the loss of their standard spreads like wildfire through the ranks of both sides. Having lost not only their physical point of reference, but their morale as well, the fate of the Navarrese is sealed. Their line falls away in panicked retreat, pursued closely by the victorious French, who hurriedly mount their horses in order to better run down their victims. Many prisoners are secured for their ransoms. One such prisoner is Pierre de Saconville, a main advisor of King Charles the Bad. Saconville will be taken to ruin and later beheaded on the orders of the new French king. As the French are starting to leave the field, the Navarrese knight Sir Guy de Greville arrives with his reinforcements from Evreux. Seeing French banners dominating the field, he realizes he is too late, and he doesn't stick around. The Battle of Cocherel is over. Du Guesclin's French are victorious. The day after news arrives of the victory, a new king of France is crowned. This marks a new phase in the 100 Years' War. Although Charles the Bad will continue his struggle for another year or so, his armies will only ever be powerful enough to occupy a role somewhere between an English distraction and immoral bandits. In the decades that follow, the French will conquer back vast stretches of both English and Navarrese territory. Charles the Bad will eventually die as a puppet of France and Castile, having driven his Navarrese kingdom into the ground by his insatiable ambition. French dominance in the field won't be properly challenged until the following century's defeats at the hands of Henry V. The Battle of Cocherel is a very interesting event for a few reasons. Firstly, Cocherel is an extremely rare case for a medieval battle where both sides actually wanted to fight. Usually in this period, one army is more desirous of a fight than the other. Maybe this keenness on both sides partly explains the brutal intensity of the melee. Secondly, it's interesting to compare the professionalism of the armies at Cocherel to those of previous battles. A French army before 1364 would never have given command to a man of lesser rank like de Gechlin, regardless of how skilled he might be. But 3 massive defeats have a way of bringing change. This improved organization extends to the rank and file, whose quality is reflected in their maneuverability and adaptability. Finally, the army sent by the French was arguably one of the earliest national French armies in history. Considering the idea of a national identity for France had yet to take hold, this was a significant achievement, to be able to muster professionals from all around the kingdom. Cocherel deserves its place in history as a minor but decisive event that may have decided the history of France.